I wasn't always the black sheep. When I was younger, I was the quiet one, the dreamer, the kid who stayed up past midnight, scribbling inventions and business ideas in a notebook instead of watching TV. My parents thought it was a phase. My sister Julia thought it was pathetic. And over time, they all decided I had failed. Julia was everything I wasn't. Homecoming queen, full scholarship to med school, straight teeth, straight A's, and a perfectly curated Instagram that made my mom cry happy tears. Every family gathering became her victory parade. Me! And my walk of shame. I still remember last Christmas. My dad handed her a brand new car key while saying, "This is for making us proud." Then he turned to me, gave me a recycled gift bag with socks inside, and said, "Maybe next year, huh?" I laughed it off, like always. But that night, I cried in my car before driving back to the city, where no one asked about my resume. The thing is, they never really knew me. Not since the day I quietly dropped out of Stanford, signed an NDA with my co-founder, and disappeared from social media. They assumed I flunked out, that I was couch surfing, jobless, and broken. And I let them. It was safer that way. So when I got the invite to Julia's birthday party, handwritten no less, I almost threw it away. Handwritten no less, I almost threw it away. "Join us to celebrate our beloved Julia's 27th, it read. Beloved, as if the rest of us were just background noise in her highlight reel. But something in me paused. I hadn't seen any of them in over 2 years. I'd turned down every holiday, every wedding invite, every backhanded brunch. But this time, I felt different. Not angry, just ready, not to prove anything. Just to be there, and see how it felt to look them in the eye after all these years. Still, the anxiety hit the second I parked outside our childhood home. The yard looked the same, overly trimmed hedges, plastic flamingos Julia always hated, and that same cracked driveway Dad refused to fix because we're not made of money. I chuckled at the irony. I stood at the door for a full minute before knocking. My mother opened it. Her expression froze for half a second, not quite surprised, not quite thrilled, just tight. "Oh, you came," she said, stepping aside. "Nice to see you too, Mom." The house was filled with pink and gold streamers. Julia always did love attention. People milled about, her friends, my aunts and uncles, neighbors. Some recognized me with a quick nod. Others blinked, like trying to place a vaguely familiar face they hadn't seen in forever. I walked through the crowd unnoticed, just like old times. Then I heard it, her voice. "There she is!" Julia came gliding down the stairs in a blush-colored designer dress, her hair curled into perfect waves. She hugged me with the grace of someone hugging a donation box. "I'm so glad you made it," she said, loud enough for others to hear. "I didn't think your schedule allowed for family things anymore." Polite laughs circled around us. I smiled. "Well, I had a gap between board meetings." She blinked, then snorted. "Good one." My parents hovered nearby, watching us. I caught Dad whisper something to my uncle, and they both chuckled. I felt 16 again, like I was back at the dinner table being told Julia deserved the bigger slice of cake because she actually did something today. I swallowed the bitterness. This was their game. Same board, same pieces. And I wasn't here to win. I was just here to witness. But then came the speech. And that's when I realized they didn't just see me as a failure. They needed me to be one. Julia tapped her glass, and everyone turned. "Thank you all for coming. It means the world to me to be surrounded by people who've believed in me, supported me, and watched me grow into the woman I am today." Applause. She smiled, eyes glinting. "Some people take longer to bloom or never do. But I've always believed that if you stay true to yourself, work hard, and don't give up, success finds you." More polite laughter. A few people turned to glance at me, and just like that, I was 12 again, being laughed at for wanting to build a robot out of cereal boxes. I held my glass tighter, but I didn't say a word, not yet. The moment Julia's little speech ended, I forced a tight smile and sipped my drink. I felt every stare in the room cling to me like static, curious, smug, pitying. My Uncle Charles patted me on the back with forced cheer. "Hey, kiddo," he said. "You doing anything these days? I heard you left school. What, 5 years ago?" "8," I replied flatly. He gave a low whistle. "Still figuring things out, huh? Well, better late than never." The way he said it, like I was some dropout barista living in a basement, made my skin crawl. I nodded politely and moved to the kitchen to breathe. I didn't belong there, I knew that, but I hadn't come for them. I had come to remind myself that I wasn't that girl anymore. The girl who cried in the bathroom after being mocked at Thanksgiving, who stayed quiet while Julia soaked up every ounce of affection in the room. I was stronger now, sharper. But standing in that kitchen, hearing the laughter spill from the living room, I felt something slip inside me, like I was shrinking. That's when my mother walked in. "I don't know why you came," she said softly, without looking at me. "Excuse me? You know how this family works. You left. You gave up on your education, your future, and now you expect us to— what? Pretend everything's fine?" "I didn't give up," I said firmly. She turned, eyebrows raised. "Really? Then what do you call disappearing for 3 years and showing up out of the blue like some mystery guest?" I clenched my fists behind my back. "I call it survival." She scoffed and left without another word. I stood there, staring at the half-melted birthday cake on the counter, and wondered how many times a heart could break before it just stopped trying to explain itself. Then the front door opened. I heard voices, louder than before, male, enthusiastic. Someone new had arrived. Then I heard Julia squeal. "Eric, you made it!" Eric. Her fiancé. The mysterious finance guy none of us had met in person. Julia had talked about him constantly on social media, but I'd never seen a single photo of them together. I walked slowly back into the living room. And then I saw him, tall, polished, handsome in that understated luxury way. He wore a navy blazer over a gray t-shirt, expensive but effortless. He had that look, the kind of man who could walk into a room and make it his without saying a word. And then his eyes landed on me. He froze. Not like someone seeing a stranger, like someone recognizing a ghost. "Wait," he said slowly, stepping forward. "No way. You're—" He turned to Julia, stunned. "This is your sister?" Julia blinked. "Yeah? Why?" He turned back to me, shaking his head with disbelief and awe. "You're the founder of NovaGen Systems, aren't you?" The room went silent. Julia's mouth dropped open. My father stood straighter. My mother looked like someone had slapped her. "And me?" I smiled, not smug, not cruel, just calm. "I usually don't take meetings at birthday parties," I said softly. "But here we are." The silence deepened. A few guests exchanged confused looks. Julia forced a laugh. "Nova? What? Eric, what are you talking about?" Eric looked like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. NovaGen. They've been dominating biotech headlines for over a year. Everyone thought the founder was some reclusive genius using a pseudonym. No one's seen her in public. My firm's been trying to arrange a meeting with her for 6 months. He looked at me again, eyes shining. "And she's you?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Because in that moment, after all the insults, the dismissals, the looks of disappointment, I had finally said everything I needed to say without uttering a word. The entire room felt like it had stopped breathing. Julia stared at Eric like he had just insulted her in a foreign language. "NovaGen? That's a real company?" she asked, laughing nervously. "I thought it was one of those crypto scams." Eric didn't laugh. He looked at her, confused. Then he turned back to me, now with a reverence in his voice that hadn't been there before. "I read every white paper. I've followed the patent filings. The predictive modeling for gene therapy? That was you?" I nodded, calm, controlled. My heart thudding beneath the surface like a war drum, but on the outside, I was the embodiment of grace. "We filed under a joint entity at first," I said. "But after our early investors cashed out, I bought out the board. It's mine now." Silence. Again. Except this time, it wasn't mocking. It was respect. uneasy, stunned respect. My father stepped forward, trying to make sense of what he was hearing. But I thought you were working at a call center. I never said that, I replied. You assumed it. I looked him in the eye, not with spite, with truth. You all needed me to be a failure because it made you feel more certain about the choices you made. So I let you think what you wanted. Julia forced a smile, her voice shrill. Okay, let's not get carried away here. Even if you are this secret founder, what kind of person hides that from their own family? Eric looked at her, frowning. You said your sister was unemployed, living off scraps, that she ghosted the family because she was embarrassed. Julia's smile faltered. Well, she kind of did. She cut everyone off. I stepped in. I protected myself. I looked around the room. I didn't cut ties. I was pushed out. Every time I tried to share something real, it was met with laughter or silence. So I built something quietly and successfully, without your permission. Eric's eyes stayed on me, wide with admiration. Do you have any idea how many VCs would kill for 10 minutes with you? He asked. My entire firm's been trying to break through to your company for months. You're the name in biotech right now. My mother, now pale, set her drink down with a shaky hand. I don't understand, she whispered. Why didn't you tell us? I stared at her for a long time. Because you wouldn't have believed me. She opened her mouth to object, but I raised a hand, not out of disrespect, but out of peace. I'm not here to make you believe anything. I came because I wanted to see how it would feel, to stand in the same room as you all again, but no longer need your approval. You could have heard a pin drop. Eric broke the tension, turning back to Julia. Why did you lie to me about her? He asked. You made her sound like a joke, but she's... He looked at me again. She's the most impressive person in this entire house. Julia turned in bright red. Because I didn't know, okay? She's been off the grid for years. No Instagram, no LinkedIn, no updates. How was I supposed to know she was building some Frankenstein lab? Eric didn't respond. He just stared at her, and that was when I saw it. A flicker of something behind his eyes. Doubt and disappointment. The first cracks in Julia's perfect image. And I didn't have to say a word. Because for the first time in my life, my presence spoke louder than their expectations. And the best part? I hadn't even begun telling the truth yet. Eric couldn't take his eyes off me. Julia, on the other hand, looked like she was trying to compute a version of reality she had never prepared for, one where I was no longer beneath her. This is ridiculous, she snapped, her voice strained. So what if she started some science company? That doesn't erase everything else. Eric raised an eyebrow. Everything else, like, what? Julia faltered. She dropped out of school, remember? She used to have panic attacks in college. She was always unstable. That hit harder than I expected. Eric looked at me. Is that true? I exhaled slowly, keeping my voice even. Yes, I did have panic attacks. I also spent nights sleeping on the floor of my apartment because I couldn't afford furniture. And I worked 16-hour days to build a startup from scratch while taking care of myself the only way I knew how, by keeping my distance from people who tore me down. The room was deadly quiet. I turned to face everyone. My parents, aunts, uncles, the neighbors who used to whisper behind my back. I don't owe anyone here an apology for surviving in silence. My father cleared his throat. Maybe we misunderstood your situation. No, Dad. You chose a narrative. You all did. It was easier to believe I was a disappointment than to accept that maybe, just maybe, you were wrong. Eric let out a quiet whistle. Jesus. He looked at Julia. You really never mentioned any of this. You told me she was just lost. Julia's composure finally cracked. She pulled me aside, dragging me halfway toward the hallway. Her grip on my wrist was tighter than I expected. What the hell are you doing? She hissed. Telling the truth, I replied. You're making me look bad in front of my fiancé. I blinked. You did that yourself. She scoffed. Are you seriously trying to ruin my engagement because you're bitter about the past? I leaned in. I didn't come here to ruin anything, Julia. You and the rest of the family did that when you decided I was only worth loving if I succeeded by your standards. She shook her head, but I could see the panic behind her eyes. Then, as I turned to walk away, I heard her whisper something to our mother across the room. Fast and low, but not quite quiet enough. He can't find out what happened 2 years ago. My steps slowed. Something in that sentence made the hair on my arms stand up. 2 years ago. NovaGen nearly went under after someone leaked proprietary data from our internal servers. We never caught the source, but we had suspicions, and now, the timeline, it lined up. Julia was hiding something about me, and Eric didn't know. That changed everything. I turned back toward the living room, just in time to see Eric watching Julia whisper to our mother. His jaw was clenched. His fingers were twitching slightly, like a man processing a puzzle whose pieces were suddenly snapping into place. I took a deep breath and crossed the room. Eric, I said, calm and direct, would you mind stepping outside for a moment? I think we should talk. He nodded immediately. Julia opened her mouth to object, but he held up a hand without looking at her. No, Julia. I want to hear her side, because I have a lot of questions now. And just like that, the balance shifted. Julia, who had always been the sun in every room, was left in the shadow of the one person she never saw coming. Me. And as I walked out onto the porch beside her fiancé, I realized something terrifying and thrilling. I hadn't come here for revenge, but I might just get it anyway. The air outside was cooler than I expected, crisp, with the faint smell of jasmine from the old bushes Mom used to prune obsessively. For a second, it felt like I was 15 again, sneaking out just to breathe. But this time, I wasn't the one sneaking around. Eric stood beside me, quiet, hands in his pockets. His perfect hair ruffled slightly in the wind. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then he broke the silence. You don't seem like someone who needs a spotlight. I smiled faintly. I don't, but it tends to find me when secrets start leaking. He turned to face me. What did Julia mean? About 2 years ago? I looked him dead in the eye. What do you know about NovaGen's breach? His brow furrowed. That was you? I nodded. 2 years ago, our early-stage biotech IP was leaked. It nearly killed our funding. One of our competitors used the stolen data to file ahead of us. Our lawyers eventually traced the breach to a burner device, one that accessed our internal network during a private pitch event. Eric's expression darkened. I remember that scandal. Everyone thought it was an insider job. We couldn't prove it, I said. But I've always suspected it wasn't random. He looked pale now. The math was adding up in his head. Julia attended a biotech summit with her ex, some guy who bragged about getting early investor access to disruptive gene modeling. I didn't think much of it then, but he got fired last year for misconduct at his firm, something to do with intellectual property. I nodded slowly. My heart was pounding, but my voice stayed steady. His name wouldn't happen to be Caleb R., would it? Eric's eyes widened. Holy shit! Yeah! I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. There it was, the missing piece. Julia's ex had stolen my research. He used her, or she helped him, to access the files through my private deck, which meant that while I was fighting to keep my company alive, my sister was helping someone else try to destroy it. And now she was engaged to a man whose firm was begging to partner with me. The irony was almost poetic. Eric sank down onto the porch steps, his hands trembling slightly. She told me you ghosted the family, had nothing going on, that you were unstable and selfish. I swallowed the lump in my throat. They always saw what they wanted to see. He looked up at me, anger flashing behind his eyes. She lied to me, about everything. I shrugged. It's her default setting. Smile, charm, manipulate. Eric rubbed his face like he was trying to erase the last 30 minutes of his life. God! She even made me promise not to mention your name in front of her parents. Said you were toxic, that the family had to cut you off. I let the words hang between us, a bitter truth stretching across the porch like fog. You know what the worst part is? I finally said. I didn't come here to expose her. I just wanted to be present. To show myself I wasn't afraid of them anymore. He stood up slowly, breathing hard. His voice was quiet now. You think she had anything to do with that leak? I didn't hesitate. I think she knew. At the very least, she benefited from it. Eric nodded, slowly, coldly, his jaw set. Then he looked back at the house. Through the window, Julia was standing in the living room, pretending to laugh with guests, but her eyes were locked on us, and her smile didn't reach her eyes. She knew. She could feel it. Her empire of lies was beginning to shift beneath her feet. What are you going to do? I asked. Eric didn't answer right away. He just kept watching her through the glass. Then he said calmly, I think it's time the golden girl finally gets a taste of the truth. And in that moment, I realized something chilling. The person who came here to hurt me had just handed me the perfect opportunity to burn everything down, without me lifting a single match. We walked back into the house like nothing had happened. But everything had. The crowd had shifted. Music played low in the background. Some guests were already a little tipsy, and Julia was back to basking in attention. Her laugh pitched just a little too high, her smile too forced. Eric's hand brushed mine briefly as we stepped in. It wasn't affection. It was a signal. He was ready. I stayed by the kitchen archway while he crossed to her, wrapping an arm around her waist. Her whole body relaxed into him like a reflex. There you are, she purred, then glanced at me coldly. I hope she didn't bore you too much. He chuckled, but there was steel behind it. Actually, we had a fascinating conversation. Turns out your sister is kind of a legend. Julia tensed. Eric! He turned toward the center of the room and clinked his glass with a knife. The chatter died down. Hi, everyone. Sorry to interrupt, but I'd like to make a quick toast. Julia blinked. Wait! What are you? He smiled, too sweetly. To Julia, of course, and to the truth. May it always come out in the end, even if it's uncomfortable. Polite laughter, but I could feel the room tighten like a drumhead. Eric continued, his voice cool and casual. It's funny. A lot of people build their image on fiction, but the truth has a way of catching up. And recently, I learned that someone very close to me might have helped leak confidential biotech data belonging to a revolutionary company. Julia's hand twitched against his chest. Eric, stop. He turned to her. You remember Caleb R., right? She went pale. Eric, don't do this here. Why not? He said, louder now. This is your party. Let's celebrate transparency. Murmurs erupted. People exchanged confused glances. My father took a step forward. What is this about? Eric turned to him without blinking. About how your younger daughter dated a man who committed felony-level intellectual property theft, and how she might have provided him the access to do it. Gasps. Someone dropped a glass. Julia's voice cracked. That's a lie. He tricked me. Eric pulled out his phone. I thought that might be your response. He tapped, then held it up. A recording played over the Bluetooth speaker he'd quietly connected to earlier. Caleb's voice. Julia, just pull the deck from her cloud drive. No one's gonna trace it. She's so reclusive, no one even knows who she is. Julia. Fine, but you owe me. If this blows up, I'm not going down with you. Her voice, her guilt, frozen in time. The silence that followed was suffocating. Julia stared at the phone like it had just turned into a weapon. Then, as if something inside her shattered, she screamed, You had no right. That was 2 years ago. I thought you loved me. Eric's voice was like ice. I did, until I found out who you really were. My parents stood in stunned horror. My mother whispered, Julia, please tell me that's not real. But she couldn't, because it was. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I just stood there, steady, unshaken, while the walls of Julia's perfect life collapsed around her. Eric looked at me across the room, his expression softening. I'm sorry you went through all that. You deserved better. From everyone here. Then he turned and walked out the door. Without her, Julia collapsed onto the couch, sobbing. Mascara streaked, her dress twisted, the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. And for once, no one rushed to comfort her. They were too busy looking at me differently now, like maybe I wasn't the family failure after all. But it was too late, because the woman they dismissed had already become something they could never claim, free. The moment Eric walked out, the room fractured. No music, no murmuring. Just the awkward creaking of shoes shifting and quiet gasps as people tried to process what they had just witnessed. Julia sat slumped on the couch like a toppled statue, her head in her hands, shaking. I stood still, not triumphant, not smug, just grounded, like I was standing on solid earth for the first time in years. My father was the first to break the silence. "Is this true?" he asked quietly, as if the softness would lessen the weight of what had been exposed. "Tell me this isn't true, Julia." She didn't answer. She just let out a guttural, embarrassed sob and shook her head, muttering, "He said it would never come back to me." I turned slowly to face him. "That's your golden child." My voice was calm, clear, but heavy with a decade's worth of disappointment. She didn't just try to hurt me. She nearly destroyed the thing I poured my life into. "And you still didn't ask me if I was okay." My mother whispered, "You could have told us." I laughed, a small bitter sound. "I did. 100 times. You just didn't listen. You were too busy looking for reasons to believe I was the disappointment." My aunt spoke next. "We didn't know. We thought you—" "Failed?" I finished for her. That's the word everyone loved to use. The family's cautionary tale, the dropout, the ghost. I looked around the room, a room that had once been filled with people who looked at me like I was nothing. The only thing I ever failed at was convincing all of you that I mattered, and I don't need to anymore. Julia finally stood, her cheeks stained, her voice trembling. "You think you're better than me now? You think you can just walk in here, humiliate me, and leave with some moral high ground?" I took a step toward her, steady. "I didn't humiliate you. I told the truth. You chose your lies. You chose betrayal. I chose silence, and built something while you were busy playing perfect." She opened her mouth to spit something venomous, but nothing came out. Just a broken breath. For a moment, I felt something stir in my chest. Sympathy? No. Closure. This wasn't vengeance. This was liberation. I turned toward the front door. People parted like waves, clearing a path. But just before I left, I paused at the threshold. "One last thing," I said, glancing back. "Do you know what it felt like? Hearing you all laugh at me every time I walked into this house? To be made small, constantly reminded that I wasn't enough for you?" No one answered. It hurt. It hollowed me, but it also lit a fire that none of you could ever put out. So thank you for every insult, every dismissal, every time you told me I was a waste of space. You helped me become the woman I am now, the one you only see because someone else recognized her first. And with that, I walked out. Into the night, into the calm, into a world where my worth was no longer dictated by the people who couldn't see it. As I reached my car, my phone buzzed. A text from Eric. "I canceled the engagement. I don't know where I'm going next, but I know I'm not going backward. Thank you for being real, for not hiding who you are." I stared at the screen, then tucked it away. I didn't need applause. I didn't need revenge. All I needed was done. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one left behind. They were. A week later, I stood backstage in a conference hall that could hold over 1,000 people. The Novatech Global Summit was an event I used to watch online from my tiny apartment, eating dollar ramen while coding through the night. Back then, I used to wonder what it would feel like to stand on that stage. Now I knew. And honestly, it felt quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from fear or loneliness, but the kind that lives inside you when you finally stop running. The kind of quiet that tells you, you've arrived. My name was printed in bold letters on the event banner above the stage. Keynote speaker, Ava Ellison, founder and CEO of NovaGen Systems. For years, I had hidden behind initials, pen names, and ghost-written bios. Let the world guess. Let them speculate. Let them underestimate me. But today, I was stepping out of the shadows, on my own terms. The host's voice boomed through the speakers. And now, please welcome a pioneer in biotech innovation, the woman whose algorithms are changing the future of genetic treatment, Ava Ellison. The applause was deafening. I stepped out into the spotlight. Black pantsuit, no jewelry, no gimmicks, just me. I looked out at the sea of faces, and something inside me clicked. Not pride, not ego, just peace. Thank you, I said into the mic. Not just for being here today, but for believing in ideas before they become reality. For supporting voices that don't always scream the loudest, but end up speaking the clearest. I paused. People always ask me why I disappeared, why I let others take credit, why I didn't chase the limelight. The answer is simple. I was too busy building, too busy surviving. Too busy being told by the people I loved that I would never make it. A few people in the front row leaned forward. But I did make it, not despite them, but in defiance of everything they said I couldn't be. I let the words land, because this time, I wasn't just talking to a tech audience. I was talking to every girl who had been underestimated, every woman who had been silenced, every dreamer who had been told their vision was too weird, too quiet, too impossible. And I was talking to the version of me that still lived in that cracked driveway, holding back tears while smiling at people who didn't deserve it. As I wrapped up my talk and walked off stage, I passed a crowd of reporters. One tried to stop me. "Ms. Ellison, how does it feel to finally be seen?" I smiled. I was always seen, just not by the people who mattered. And with that, I kept walking. That night, I sat in my apartment, high above the city I had built my empire in, watching the sun set behind glass towers. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from my mother. "We watched your speech. We didn't know you had all of that inside you." I stared at the screen for a moment. Then I put the phone down. No reply. They could keep their realizations, their delayed pride, their too-late apologies. Because I had found something better. Self-worth that wasn't tied to anyone's validation. Success that wasn't defined by applause. Freedom that came from no longer needing to explain myself to people who never wanted to understand. As the city lights flickered on one by one, I poured myself a glass of wine and turned on my speaker. And for the first time in a long time, I danced. Alone. Free. Not to celebrate revenge, but because I had nothing left to prove, and everything ahead of me to live. Would you like a compiled full version of all 8 parts in one clean document? Or would you like assistance creating the thumbnail content and image for this story next?